The Forge of Liberty Prologue. The brewing storm listened to the wind blowing off the cold Atlantic Ocean. For more than a century, this ocean separated Great Britain from her American colonies. It was a distance of water, time, and identity. Across that distance, the colonies had grown from fragile settlements into confident communities. They built farms, ports, churches, newspapers, assemblies, and trade networks. They fought for the British crown in the French and Indian War, bleeding in the forests of North America, believing they were loyal partners in a shared empire. But empires rarely share power. When the French and Indian War ended in 1763, Britain stood victorious, but buried beneath a mountain of debt. In London, Parliament looked across the Atlantic and saw prosperous colonies that could help pay the bill. First came the Sugar Act, then came the Stamp Act, taxing printed paper, legal documents, newspapers, pamphlets, and even playing cards. To British ministers, these taxes were reasonable. To the colonists, they were a violation. They had no elected representatives in Parliament. They had no voice in the laws being imposed upon them. To be taxed without consent was not simply an economic burden. It was a warning that their rights as English subjects could be reduced by a distant government they could not influence. A phrase began to spread from taverns to town squares: no taxation without representation. The British government answered colonial resistance with stricter laws, troops, and warships. But force did not calm the colonies. It hardened them. Every new decree seemed to prove that Parliament saw Americans not as partners, but as subjects to be managed. A dangerous question began to rise. Were the colonists still loyal citizens of the British Empire, or were they becoming something else entirely? The answer would come in the streets of Boston, in the snow, beneath the smoke of British muskets. Chapter 1. Blood on the Snow. It is the evening of March 5. T-by-T-shirt. Boston is locked in the grip of a New England winter. Snow and ice cover the cobblestone streets. The air is sharp. The harbor is dark, and the city is tense. For more than a year, British soldiers have occupied Boston. Red-coated troops patrol narrow streets, guard government buildings, and stand as a constant reminder of royal authority. To the soldiers, Boston is an unfriendly city full of insults and threats. To the people of Boston, the soldiers are an occupying force. On King Street, outside the Custom House, Private Hugh White stands alone on guard duty. The Custom House is hated because it represents taxes, customs duties, and British control. White is cold, tired, and surrounded by resentment. A young apprentice named Edward Garrick passes nearby and insults a British officer, accusing him of failing to pay a bill. White steps forward, orders the boy to show respect, and the argument quickly escalates. In anger, White strikes Garrick with the butt of his musket. The boy falls onto the icy street, crying out in pain. The cry draws a crowd. Men emerge from taverns, workshops, alleys, and docks. Sailors, laborers, apprentices, and artisans surround the sentry. They shout insults. They throw snowballs, ice, shells, and stones. The crowd grows larger by the minute. Then the church bells begin to ring. In Boston, bells at night usually mean fire. People rush into the streets carrying buckets, but they find no flames. Instead, they find a confrontation outside the Custom House. More men join the crowd. Private White, now frightened, calls for help. Captain Thomas Preston arrives with a small detachment of soldiers. They push through the crowd and form a line near the Custom House steps. Their muskets are loaded. Their bayonets point toward the people. Preston stands in front of his men, trying to prevent disaster. But the crowd presses closer. Among those near the front is Crispus Attucks, a sailor of African and Native American descent. He has lived under the pressure of British power and maritime life. And now he stands defiantly before the soldiers. The crowd dares the troops to fire. A chunk of ice strikes Private Edward Montgomery. He slips, falls, and rises in fury. In the chaos, he grabs his musket and fires. The shot tears through the night. For one instant, everything stops. Then panic spreads through the British line. Other soldiers fire. Flashes of flame cut through the darkness. Smoke fills the street. The crowd screams and breaks apart, slipping across the ice as men run for their lives. When the smoke clears, bodies lie on the snow. Crispus Attucks is dead. Samuel Gray and James Caldwell are dead. Samuel Maverick and Patrick Carr are mortally wounded and will soon die. 5 civilians have been shot in the streets of their own city. Captain Preston stares at the bodies and at his trembling soldiers. In a matter of seconds, an argument has become a historic wound. To British officials, it is a riot that went wrong. To Boston, it is a massacre. Paul Revere's engraving spreads the image throughout the colonies. The dead become symbols. The dispute is no longer only about taxes or paper. It is about blood. Boston does not forget. The colonies do not forget. And the empire has crossed a line it cannot easily step back from. Chapter 2. The shattered chests. 3 years pass. But the anger in Boston does not disappear. It settles deeper. Parliament repeals many unpopular taxes, but leaves one tax in place. The tax on tea. It is small, but it carries a large message. Britain is saying, Parliament still has the right to tax the colonies. The colonists answer, we will not accept that right without representation. In late 1723, 3 ships arrive in Boston Harbor: the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. Their holds contain 340 chests of East India Company tea. Under British law, the tea must be unloaded and the tax paid. Governor Thomas Hutchinson refuses to let the ships leave without payment. Boston enters a political countdown. For days, thousands gather at the Old South Meeting House. Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty demand that the tea be sent back to Britain. Hutchinson refuses. British law says the cargo cannot remain untouched forever. The deadline approaches. On December 16, 1826, the meeting house is packed. Men stand in the aisles, crowd the doors, and spill into the street. The final message arrives. The governor will not allow the ships to leave. The tea will be unloaded. The tax will be collected. Samuel Adams rises before the crowd. He understands that words have reached their limit. He declares that the meeting can do nothing more to save the country. It is the signal. A cry breaks from the back of the hall. Men rush into the night. In taverns and back rooms, others are already prepared. They darken their faces with soot, dress in rough clothing, and disguise themselves as Mohawk warriors. They carry hatchets and axes, not muskets. They march to Griffin's Wharf. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Bostonians follow as witnesses. The men board the ships with discipline and purpose. They do not attack the crews. They do not steal. They do not damage the vessels. Their target is one thing only: the tea. Chest after chest is hauled from the holds. Axes rise and fall. Wood cracks. Tea spills into the cold black water of Boston Harbor. For 3 hours, the work continues in near silence. The sound of chopping wood echoes over the wharf. The harbor fills with floating tea leaves. By the end, all 340 chests have been destroyed. Then, the men do something that surprises even their enemies. They sweep the decks clean. This is not a drunken riot. It is political theater. Property destruction carried out with discipline and a message. The colonies will not submit quietly. When King George III hears the news, his anger is absolute. Britain closes Boston Harbor. The Massachusetts government is restricted. British authority tightens its grip. These punishments become known in America as the Intolerable Acts. But instead of isolating Boston, the punishment unites the colonies. Food and supplies come from other towns. Sympathy spreads. Leaders from different colonies begin to see that if Boston can be punished this way, any colony can be next. The tea floating in the harbor is not the end of the crisis. It is the beginning of open resistance. Chapter 3. The shot heard round the world by the spring of 1775. Massachusetts is on the edge of war. General Thomas Gage commands thousands of British troops in Boston, but outside the city, in the villages and farms of Massachusetts, the countryside is in rebellion. Colonial militias drill in public. Gunpowder, muskets, and cannon are hidden in barns and storehouses. The Minutemen promise to be ready at a minute's notice. Gage knows that if he allows the rebellion to grow, Boston will become a British island surrounded by armed enemies. He receives intelligence that a rebel weapons cache is stored in Concord, about 20 miles away. He also hears that Samuel Adams and John Hancock are staying in Lexington, on the road to Concord. On the night of April 18, 1872, Gage orders about 700 British soldiers to move in secret. They will cross the Charles River, march through the night, seize the weapons at Concord, and if possible, arrest Adams and Hancock. But the colonists have spies everywhere. Dr. Joseph Warren alerts the Patriot Network. Paul Revere and other writers prepare to spread the alarm. In the steeple of the Old North Church, 2 lanterns are shown. The British are moving by water. Revere crosses the river and rides into the dark countryside. His ride is not a wild, solitary sprint. It is an organized warning system. He stops at selected houses, wakes militia leaders, and tells them the regulars are coming out. Other riders carry the warning farther. Bells ring. Alarm shots echo across the hills. Doors open. Men reach for muskets. By the time the British column begins its march, secrecy is gone. At dawn on April 19, the British advance guard reaches Lexington. A pale fog hangs over the village green. Waiting there are 77 militiamen under Captain John Parker. They are farmers, tradesmen, fathers, and sons. They are not professional soldiers. They are badly outnumbered. Parker looks at the wall of redcoats approaching through the morning light. He knows his men cannot defeat the British in open battle, but he also knows that they must show they will not be treated like criminals in their own towns. His order is simple: do not fire unless fired upon. But if war comes, let it begin here. Major John Pitcairn rides forward and orders the militia to disperse. Parker tells his men to leave. The militiamen begin to step away from the green, still holding their muskets. Then a shot rings out. No one knows who fired it. The British troops, exhausted and tense from the night march, react with a volley. Smoke covers the green. Men fall. Some British soldiers charge with bayonets before their officers regain control. When the smoke clears, 8 Americans are dead and 10 are wounded. One man, Jonathan Harrington, drags himself across the ground and dies near his own doorstep. The people of Lexington gather their dead while the British continue toward Concord. The British believe they have crushed the resistance. They are wrong. At Concord, militia from nearby towns gather in growing numbers. The British search for weapons, burn gun carriages, and throw supplies into the mill pond. But outside town, near the North Bridge, hundreds of Americans are forming. They see smoke rising and fear that the British are burning Concord. Colonel James Barrett orders the militia forward. At the bridge, British soldiers fire first. 2 Americans fall. This time, the Americans do not scatter. Major John Buttrick shouts for his men to fire. The American line fires into the British ranks. British soldiers fall, including officers. The British detachment breaks and retreats. The first real exchange of the war has occurred. Colonel Francis Smith realizes that his column is in danger. His men are tired, low on ammunition, and surrounded by an angry countryside. He orders a retreat back to Boston. That retreat becomes a 16-mile corridor of fire. Militiamen from town after town arrive throughout the day. They do not fight in neat European lines. They use stone walls, trees, barns, and windows. They fire, move, disappear, and fire again. The British column bleeds mile after mile. The redcoats are exhausted. The sun rises high. Ammunition runs low. Men fall in the road, wounded or dead. British discipline begins to break in places. Fear and rage spread through the ranks. A relief force under Lord Percy saves the column from destruction. But the retreat continues all the way back to the safety of Boston. By the end of the day, the British have suffered nearly 300 casualties. The impossible has happened. Farmers, shopkeepers, and local militia have stood against the army of the British Empire and driven it back. The American Revolutionary War has begun. Chapter 4. The Price of Independence. After Lexington and Concord, Boston is no longer merely occupied. It is surrounded. Thousands of colonial militia gather around the city. They are not a polished army, but they have trapped the British inside Boston. The Empire now faces a humiliating reality. Its soldiers control the city, but the countryside belongs to the rebels. In June 1775, the Americans decide to strengthen their position by occupying the heights overlooking Boston. Under cover of darkness, colonial forces move onto Breed's Hill, near Bunker Hill, and begin building earthworks. When the sun rises, the British are stunned. American fortifications now threaten the city and the harbor. The British cannot ignore the challenge. General William Howe prepares a frontal assault. The British soldiers advance in disciplined lines, redcoats bright beneath the summer sun. Their officers expect the rebels to break when faced with professional troops and bayonets. But the Americans wait behind their defenses. They are low on ammunition, so their officers order them to hold fire until the enemy is close. The British climb the hill under the weight of heat, smoke, and expectation. Then, the American line erupts. Muskets tear into the British ranks. Men fall in rows. The first assault breaks. Then, a second assault fails. The British attack again. This time, the Americans are nearly out of powder. The British reach the earthworks. The fighting becomes hand-to-hand. The Americans retreat, and the British take the hill. Technically, Britain wins, but the victory is devastating. More than 1,000 British soldiers are killed or wounded. The Empire has taken a small piece of ground at an enormous cost. The colonists have proven they can stand against regular troops in open battle. Bunker Hill sends a message to both sides. To the British, it says, this war will not be quick. To the Americans, it says resistance is possible. Yet many colonists still do not openly call for independence. They say they are defending their rights as Englishmen. They blame Parliament. Some still hope King George III will intervene and restore justice. That hope fades. The king declares the colonies to be in rebellion. British policy hardens. War becomes unavoidable. The old relationship cannot be repaired. In January 1776, Thomas Paine publishes Common Sense. The pamphlet is short, direct, and explosive. Paine argues that a continent should not be ruled by an island, and that hereditary monarchy is an insult to reason. His words spread through the colonies with extraordinary speed. In farms, taverns, towns, and army camps, people read and discussed the idea that independence is not only possible, but necessary. By the summer of 1776, the Second Continental Congress faces the question that can no longer be avoided. Should the colonies declare themselves free and independent states? In Philadelphia, the air is hot and heavy. The delegates know what they are doing. This is not symbolic politics. This is treason against the British Crown. If they fail, they may lose their property, their families, their freedom, and their lives. Thomas Jefferson drafts the Declaration of Independence. The document is not merely a complaint against a king. It makes a larger claim that all men are created equal, that they possess rights, and that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. Those words are radical. They are also incomplete in practice. The new nation will struggle for generations with the meaning of equality and liberty. But in that moment, the Declaration gives the revolution a new identity. It is no longer only a fight over taxes, laws, or representation. It is a fight over the right of a people to govern themselves. On July 4, 1870, Congress adopts the Declaration of Independence. The colonies have crossed the final line. There can be no easy return to loyalty now. The men who signed the document have placed their names before history and before the hangman. If America wins, they will be founders. If America loses, they will be traitors. The war for rights has become a war for independence. Chapter 5. The Burden of Command. 2 months later, the Second Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia. The colonies now have an army around Boston, but it is barely an army. It has courage, but little discipline. It has muskets, but few supplies. It has anger, but no unified command. John Adams understands the danger. If this remains only a New England fight, it may fail. The war needs a commander who can unite the colonies, especially the powerful South. One man in the room stands out. George Washington of Virginia is tall, controlled, and dressed in military uniform. He had served in the French and Indian War. He is not the most experienced general in the world, but he has presence, discipline, and a reputation for courage. Congress appoints him Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Washington accepts, but he knows what the title means. If the rebellion fails, he will not be treated as a defeated officer. He will be treated as a traitor. When Washington arrives in Cambridge to take command, he is alarmed by what he finds. The army surrounding Boston is brave but disorderly. Men sleep in rough shelters. They resist authority. They elect officers, ignore orders, and lack basic supplies. Washington begins the slow work of turning volunteers into soldiers. But his greatest test comes not in victory, but in defeat. In 1776, the British strike New York with overwhelming force. Warships fill the harbor. Thousands of trained soldiers land under General William Howe. Washington tries to defend the city, but he is outmaneuvered at Brooklyn. His army is nearly trapped against the East River. Only a nighttime retreat, hidden by fog, saves the army from destruction. Then comes one loss after another. Manhattan is abandoned. Fort Washington falls. New Jersey is nearly lost. By December, Washington's army is starving, freezing, and shrinking. Many enlistments will expire at the end of the year. In a few weeks, he may have no army left. The revolution is close to collapse. Washington chooses to gamble everything. On Christmas night, he leads his remaining men across the Delaware River in a storm. The password is victory or death. The river is filled with ice. The boats are dangerous. The weather is brutal. Many soldiers have no shoes. Some leave blood on the snow. The crossing takes longer than planned. But Washington refuses to turn back. His army marches through the storm toward Trenton, New Jersey, where Hessian mercenaries are stationed. At dawn, the Americans strike. The Hessians are caught by surprise. Cannon under Henry Knox fire down the streets. American soldiers push into the town. In less than an hour, the Hessian force is broken. Nearly 1,000 prisoners are taken. The victory is small in military scale, but enormous in meaning. The army has survived. Hope returns. A week later, Washington outmaneuvers Lord Cornwallis near Trenton, leaves his campfires burning to deceive the British, and marches through the night to attack at Princeton. At Princeton, American troops begin to falter under a British charge. Then Washington rides forward, into the open. Between the lines, he rallies the men under fire. For a moment, he seems certain to be killed. When the smoke clears, he is still in the saddle. The Americans rapidly win. Trenton and Princeton do not end the war, but they save the Revolution. They prove that the Continental Army can still fight. They force the British to rethink New Jersey. More importantly, they make Washington the indispensable man of the American cause. His genius is not that he wins every battle. He does not. His genius is that he keeps the army alive. As long as Washington's army remains in the field, the Revolution remains alive. Chapter 6. The Wilderness Trap. In 1777, Britain tries to end the rebellion with a bold plan. General John Burgoyne will march south from Canada through New York. He will capture Albany and cut New England off from the rest of the colonies. Once the radical heart of the rebellion is isolated, Britain believes the war can be won. On paper, the plan is simple. In the wilderness, it becomes a disaster. Burgoyne brings thousands of British regulars, Hessian soldiers, artillery, supplies, and heavy baggage. He believes he is marching toward a decisive victory. But the forests of upstate New York are not a parade ground. The roads are narrow. The terrain is difficult. The American defenders understand the land. General Philip Schuyler orders a scorched earth retreat. Trees are cut across roads. Bridges are destroyed. Streams are blocked. Burgoyne's army slows to a crawl. Every mile becomes work. Supplies stretch thin. Then the militia begins to gather. Local anger grows, especially after reports of violence involving Burgoyne's native allies. Farmers take up rifles and join the American forces. Daniel Morgan's riflemen arrive, skilled marksmen from the frontier. They do not fight like European infantry. They use trees, brush, and distance. They target officers. They make the British feel watched from every shadow. By September, Burgoyne reaches the area near Saratoga, where American forces block his road to Albany. The armies clash at Freeman's Farm. The battle is bloody and hard. The British hold the ground, but suffer losses they cannot replace. Burgoyne waits for support that never comes. His supplies fall. His army weakens. The American force grows larger. On October 7th, Burgoyne tries one final move. At this moment, Benedict Arnold rides into history. Arnold is one of the most aggressive American commanders. Brave, ambitious, and difficult. He has argued bitterly with General Horatio Gates and has been removed from command. Gates wants him away from the battle, but Arnold hears the guns and cannot stay still. He rides onto the battlefield without permission. His presence electrifies the men. He leads attacks, pushes forward, and throws himself into the center of the fighting. The Americans strike hard against the British lines. Arnold drives toward the enemy redoubts, and in the assault, a musket ball shatters his leg. His horse falls on him, but the attack succeeds. If Arnold had died there, he might be remembered as one of the greatest heroes of the Revolution. Instead, he survives, and his bitterness will one day lead him to betrayal. For Burgoyne, the battle is lost, surrounded, weakened, and outnumbered. He has no way forward and no safe retreat. On October 10, he surrenders his army. Nearly 6,000 British and Hessian soldiers lay down their weapons. It is a stunning humiliation for Britain and a massive victory for the American cause. The world notices. In Paris, Benjamin Franklin uses the victory to convince France that America can win. France enters the war as an American ally. French money, weapons, troops, and naval power change the entire conflict. Saratoga transforms a colonial rebellion into a global war. Chapter 7. The crucible victory at Saratoga brings hope, but it does not end suffering. In the winter of 1777, Washington's army marches into Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. The British occupy Philadelphia in comfort. Washington's men camp in the cold, hungry and poorly supplied. The army lacks shoes, coats, blankets, and food. Many soldiers wrap their feet in rags. Some leave bloody footprints in the frozen ground. The men build small wooden huts and crowd inside for warmth. Then, hunger settles over the camp. There is often no meat. Sometimes, there is not enough flour. Soldiers survive on fire cake, a hard mixture of flour and water cooked over coals. It fills the stomach but does little more. The cry of no meat becomes part of the misery of the camp. Disease follows hunger. Typhus, pneumonia, and dysentery spread through the crowded huts. Men cough, freeze, weaken, and die. Nearly 2,000 soldiers perish at Valley Forge. Washington is pushed to despair. He writes to Congress that the army may starve, dissolve, or disperse. He needs food, clothing, and order. Without them, independence may die without a final battle. Then, Baron Friedrich von Steuben arrives. Von Steuben is a Prussian officer with military discipline and little English. What he finds at Valley Forge alarms him. The army is brave, but inconsistent. Regiments drill differently. Muskets are poorly maintained. Camp sanitation is weak. Washington gives him authority to train the troops. Von Steuben begins with a model company. He teaches the men how to stand, march, load, fire, maneuver, and use the bayonet. He drills them in the mud. He demonstrates the movements himself. When language fails, he gestures, curses, and repeats the lesson until the men understand. He also improves camp order and sanitation. He demands that officers care for their men and that the army function like a professional force. Slowly, discipline spreads. The trained men teach others. The army changes. Valley Forge is not remembered because of a great battlefield victory. It is remembered because the army endured. The men who survived hunger, cold, disease, and despair became hardened. They had suffered together, and they had not broken. When they march out in the spring of 1778, they are no longer simply a collection of militias. They are the Continental Army. Chapter 8. The world turned upside down. By 1781, the war has dragged on for 6 years. Britain shifts its hopes to the south, expecting loyalist support to restore control. Lord Charles Cornwallis marches through the Carolinas and Virginia, winning battles but wearing down his army. Before Yorktown, the war passes through a brutal southern phase. Britain believes the South holds the key to victory. British commanders expect large numbers of loyalists in Georgia and the Carolinas to rise in support of the crown. If the British can control the southern colonies, they may roll north and crush the rebellion from below. At first, the plan seems to work. Savannah falls. Charleston falls. Thousands of American soldiers are captured. At Camden, an American army is badly defeated. The Southern cause appears close to collapse. But British victories create new problems. The war in the South becomes personal and savage. Neighbor fights neighbor. Loyalists and patriots attack each other in raids, ambushes, and revenge killings. The British Army can win battles, but it cannot easily control the countryside. American commanders adapt. Nathanael Greene avoids total destruction and forces the British to chase him across difficult ground. Daniel Morgan wins a brilliant victory at Cowpens, using militia and Continental soldiers together to trap and shatter part of Cornwallis's army. At Guilford Courthouse, Cornwallis wins the field, but loses so many men that the victory weakens him instead of strengthening him. The British still hold ports and cities, but the interior remains hostile. Cornwallis grows frustrated. He decides to move into Virginia, hoping to cut American supply lines and force a decisive result. That decision leads him to Yorktown. He eventually moves to Yorktown, a small port on the Virginia coast. The town sits near deep water, and Cornwallis believes the Royal Navy can supply him or rescue him if necessary. He thinks the sea is his escape. It becomes his prison. Washington and the French commander Rochambeau receive vital news. A French fleet under Admiral de Grasse is sailing toward the Chesapeake Bay. If the French Navy can block the bay, and if the Allied army can march south quickly enough, Cornwallis can be trapped. Washington acts with secrecy and speed. He leaves forces near New York to deceive the British commander there, then marches hundreds of miles south with American and French troops. In September, the French fleet fights the British at the Battle of the Capes and wins control of the Chesapeake. The Royal Navy cannot rescue Cornwallis. The sea is closed. Washington and Rochambeau arrive with more than 16,000 men. Yorktown is surrounded by land and sea. The siege begins. The Allied army digs trenches called parallels, moving closer and closer to the British lines. Heavy guns are brought forward. On October 9, Washington personally fires the first American cannon. Then the entire Allied line erupts. Artillery pounds Yorktown day and night. British defenses crumble. Buildings are smashed. Ships burn in the harbor. Cornwallis has nowhere to run. 2 British redoubts still block the Allies from bringing their artillery close enough for the final blow. They must be taken by force. On the night of October 14, the French attack Redoubt No. 9. The Americans attack Redoubt No. 10. The American assault is led by Alexander Hamilton, a young officer who has long wanted a field command to preserve surprise. The men unload their muskets and charge with bayonets. They move through darkness. A British sentry spots them. A shot flashes. Hamilton orders the charge. The Americans rush forward under fire, cross the ditch, push through the defenses, and storm the redoubt. In minutes, they take it. The French capture their target as well. Now, Cornwallis is finished. On October 17, a British drummer appears. A white flag is raised. The guns fall silent. 2 days later, the British army marches out to surrender. Cornwallis does not attend, claiming illness. His representative first attempts to surrender to the French, but Rochambeau directs him to Washington. Washington, refusing to accept surrender from a subordinate, directs him to his own second-in-command, Benjamin Lincoln. The British lay down their weapons. The impossible has happened. The world's greatest empire has been defeated by its former colonies. The war will not officially end for 2 more years, but the decisive struggle is over. Yorktown breaks Britain's will to continue the war on the same scale. The American colonies have won their independence. Epilogue: The Measure of a Man. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially recognizes the United States of America as an independent nation. British troops evacuate New York. The long war is over. For George Washington, victory brings one final test. Most victorious military leaders in history seek more power. Some become kings. Some become dictators. Some claim that only they can save the nation they helped create. Washington chooses a different path. At Fraunces Tavern in New York, he says farewell to the officers who served with him through hunger, defeat, and victory. Then, he travels to Annapolis, where the Continental Congress is meeting. There, he resigns his commission. He gives up military command and returns power to civilian government. Then he rides home to Mount Vernon as a private citizen. When King George III hears that Washington intends to surrender power and return to his farm, he is astonished. If Washington does that, the king says, he will be the greatest man in the world. The American Revolution was not only a military struggle, it was a test of an idea that government should not rest on kings, crowns, or inherited power, but on the consent of the governed. It was fought in the snow of Boston, on Lexington Green, across the icy Delaware, in the forests of Saratoga, in the suffering of Valley Forge. and in the trenches of Yorktown. It was imperfect. It was unfinished. It was full of contradictions. But it changed the world. It proved that an empire could be challenged. It proved that ordinary people could alter history. And it gave political life to a dangerous, powerful idea that liberty, once imagined, can become strong enough to shake the earth. The world had been turned upside down.